Every second year I come to Australia, and it's a big pleasure every time. But going from like 15 minus degrees to 30 plus in Sydney, and down to a little bit chilly, it has taken my voice. So I hope it will last for 30 minutes, and if not, I have fisherman's friends. So. That's the idea. So, a little bit about me. I worked as a CEO for a hospital consulting company in Norway, and for many years. And the three of us behind that company started to develop a software. And but at the point we started developing it, we had no idea that this one should bring me on work to Australia. It was made to replace Excel in the beginning for the owners to handle their requirements better in projects. And the fact that we were actually taking on a workflow that was global and that no one had actually made a software to solve better, that came as a big surprise to us. But anyway, that made the groundwork for dRofus as a company. And I jumped in 2011 over to dRofus and has been the CEO there since. And in 2017, we became a member of the Nemetschek group. So dRofus software has been on the market for quite many years then. First release was in 2001 actually, as part of the consultant company. And we have seen some traction over the years. From 2008 approximately, we started to go out of Norway and Scandinavia. And we have a majority of owners as our customers in Scandinavian countries. In the US, we see so far most design companies, the big ones. And Australia is a good mix actually. We have picked up some quite good accounts lately. And just before Christmas we and replacing their internal planning tool for all their hospital buildings. They are one of the biggest hospital owners and builders in the world. We also signed Bouygues Construction globally, which is an account we have been working on for many years to sign off. And that was a really good achievement for us, and it tells us that we are on the right path. It says here that it is made for large and complex building projects. Obviously, the benefits of using a tool like dRofus is biggest when it's the big project. But honestly, I think the smallest project had like 20 rooms or something. So there are benefits regardless, but the benefit grows as the project is growing. To use dRofus in the best way, obviously to see the value of planning it, either before or in parallel with designing it. That's a good starting point. And too often we simply see that the planning is done directly and only in the BIM authoring tools, which works obviously quite well because there's a lot of building in the world that doesn't use dRofus. But it is hard to get the owner requirements organized in a way where it is possible to check if this building actually answers the owner needs. So why should we do building programming? Simply because it's the only way to take the owner needs and end users' requirements seriously and keep that separated from the design and build solution so we are able to compare it. If you only have one source of information, it's hard to compare. Then you have to track all changes in one source. That makes it difficult to get a real validation. This here I made more than 20 years ago as a part of the consultancy service. At that point, it wasn't necessarily thinking of software, but it is actually just as valid today as it was back then. It points out that doing the process of building programming is a very tight integrated but still separate process from doing design, engineering and construction. You can say that the background of dRofus was growing out of this one. We have to make a tool that are able to handle this information outside of the models. And adding then on the requirements, also adding general data management on top of that. That made dRofus become a good tool not only for the owners, but also for the whole design, engineering, and construction team, because it makes it possible to access data without having to open the models and search for it there. So, going further into that, data and geometry, this work from Arto Kiviniemi in Finland back in 2011 says something about the silos of information that we do operate with in any building project. We have to create information, we have to create geometry, to create digital twins. It is a number of sources of information that needs to be combined. The only way to get this data consolidated is to store it in a separate database outside of the BIM Oslo tools. This work in 2011 also is very important leading up to the UK BIM requirements that came in 2013 with a model that many of you have seen, pointing out that BIM is made up of three elements. It is the geometry, it is the non-geometrical data, and it's the documentation. And capturing all that is the common data environment. It's separate but still very connected. And obviously dRofus is scoping the non-graphical data here. We are aiming at taking care of and establishing the data models for the life cycle of the building. We started out with the requirements data model, that's the owner requirements and equipment plans. We have been quite strong also in capturing the modeling information, and we are also giving value to construction and operation. The project I'm going to talk about today, that is the operational phase for the Terminal 2 project, Oslo Airport. Sorry about that. And that is a life cycle data management example. It is a way, an approach they have chosen for handling information in the life cycle of the building. And Avinor owns and operates 45 airports in Norway. This project I'm going to describe now was the Terminal 2 extension of the national airport. And out of that, it has grown to be a solution that they are now pushing into all 45 airports in Norway. They came to us and sold us a solution about our tool that we didn't see at the point. We are back now in 2013. They said that we use your software for projects. And we think it's really, really good for asset management in operation. We were kind of a little bit negative to that because we want to stay in the project phase, but they convinced us that this will be a good solution. So we decided to work with them, and in 2014 they took in dRofus as the master asset database in the airport. It has been running since then. And if you look upon the project here, there was a large number of models involved. It's a 150,000 square meter project, approximately. So they obviously had a lot of native models across all disciplines. They had several times a week IFC exports and consolidating those models in an IFC model server and use that as a collaboration format throughout the whole project. They synchronized the design and engineering files continuously with dRofus. That made it possible for them to deliver at the end of the project not only updated design models, they also had a database that was connected to the design models, holding all the asset data and all the documentation about all the assets. That's a quite unique situation to have at the handover of a project. And obviously it didn't come for free. There was a lot of processes involved, which I will come back to. And then we are into BIM in FM, and they said, if we use the same database, we have some benefits here. They will eliminate the handovers. If you use one database for assets, it's only the status change of the asset that is different. And because if you finish a project, you immediately start to renovate it. So their issue was that we need to track our assets for security reasons from we buy the asset until demolition. We need to know the whole history, and these handovers in project phases is messing everything up. We always lose data. Even if we use Kobe, whatever we use, we want it to be in one database and simply change the status of the assets. That will solve their problem on the handovers. Also with the documentation, if you build it up in one database, it's available throughout the project and in operation. And the maintenance people can track always back to the planning and the requirements. They use dRofus also as the one single source for creating unique IDs for assets across all applications. That made it possible for the applications to talk to each other about the same assets. And that made this solution, where they early on said that we put in dRofus as the master asset database, not only in project, but also in operation. Then we synchronize between dRofus and our FM system, because we have not added any functionality to operate any building. We are only the container of the assets. But the maintenance people, in their interface of their FM system, they can see if an asset is in operational phase and their responsibility, or if that asset is in a project at the moment and being the responsibility for the project manager. That synchronizes continuously so that the source for all asset information in the FM systems come from dRofus, not stored inside of the FM system. The handheld version of that for the maintenance people can be different applications. We have a web version with a viewer that can be used. I will show you an example of something called Renfra, a Norwegian company, so have a very nice solution. Catenda, another solution from Norway. So that can run through API connections and be whatever you want it to be, as long as we make sure that it synchronizes the right information. And some work processes, let's focus a little bit on them. First, they did architectural programming for the project, of course, in dRofus. And this is part of the deliverable for the competition when they won the buildingSMART award in 2018. They pointed out some of the key features, and quite many of them actually. I will just highlight a few of them here, of course focusing on the parts that involves dRofus. Some learnings they had during the project is that the contracts in these kind of projects doesn't normally have very specific descriptions on either which tools to be used or what kind of work processes should be applied. They also learned that even if you give opportunities to the contractors and subcontractors that let's do this easier and more efficient, if it is a violation of the contract, they will still ask for more money. That's kind of the way it works all over the world, I think. So they need to, they learn, of course, that this has to be in place very early and before you write up the contract. It's also to end up with a solution of updated models where the model actually is a digital twin. You cannot achieve that unless you're willing to pay architects and engineers to update the models to actually reflect the built environment. So what they ended up with was an investment early on to harvest that information later on in operation. Training of staff over a project running over like 5, 6, 7 years. Obviously there's a big turnover of new people coming in. They run continuously training in the different tools applied so that everyone was doing the job correctly. And tagging in objects, nagging about tagging. I will come back to this also because at the moment in 2012, 2013, dRofus did not have the possibility of automatically applying unique IDs on the system objects, the MEP models. We only were able to do it on rooms and equipment in rooms. So they had to manually actually add the tags on the MEP models to make sure that you had the right ID in the database and in the model. Now we can do this 100% automatically, but for them to keep this updated, it was very important. a simulation. They also made a simulation tool, 22,000 employees, and an airport needs to operate 100% from the day it opens. They invested in taking the information out of the IFC models, create a gaming environment where it was possible for them to have people run through a 30 minutes gaming session and be able to make themselves knowledge about the airport. Saved obviously a lot of resources instead of having people be in the building sites. So here is an example. It is in Norwegian though, but you get the idea on how this works and how they built up actually an extremely well and detailed model of the airport. It looks exactly like this when you visit Oslo Airport the next time. So this guy has a purpose.
Nei, kunne du sluppet meg gjennom?
Can you let me through? But he has actually forgotten his ID card.
Jeg glemte det igjen på gate A6, hvor jeg jobber I dag.
So he has to run back and pick up his ID card before he is
Jeg løper og henter ID-kortet mitt.
we can go there. Now he gets a task of moving up to gate C4. And these types of tasks were given to the employees. Go there and go there, so they had to navigate themselves and make themselves known inside of the built environment. So when they actually were let in there, they knew the airport from before. And the fact that they built this gaming engine based upon the IFC models is quite cool, to be honest. So here he arrives at gate C4 with a plane going to Bergen, and he's good to go. So that was the gaming they did as part of it. Some of the key success they had with the use of dRofus here, the key elements is obviously to get a correct and complete asset register for the whole airport. They didn't only take the new build construction, they also did a laser scanning to get the models up for existing building and established also the asset register for the existing building. They made dRofus the master in order to make sure that they had a tool that are able to track all changes to all assets at all time, who did it, possibly also when and how. And the fact that they were connecting the objects across all the disciplines, all the different tools being used with the unique ID generated by dRofus made it possible for them to have these tools talk to each other. This is the one with code validation. The fact that they had to manually add the ID codes on each object in their MEP models generated by dRofus made it also necessary for them to check that it was correct. They used Solibri for that. And I'll now show you a tool which is called Rendra. It's a handheld tool for visualizing your models and your drawings and your documentation. What they have done is that when you see on the left side here, you can see that they are browsing the data about the objects when you click the objects. But he also has built in an access to the dRofus. So it immediately changes to browse both in the asset register in the dRofus and in the model data. So you have two sources of data available for each object that you click on. Here he goes into the dRofus web, full access to all the information in the dRofus, and he has access to the data in the models. And this is then across a large number of models and different disciplines. So they have access to absolutely everything here. The model information, the asset information in the asset database, checking that the keys are correct, and they have access to the documentations as well. So in this project, they use this Rendra tool on site to make the models available for everyone that needed to see consolidated models. Let's move on to what one of the managers in Avinor says. here.
Important thing here is to take care of the information through the whole life cycle. That means that you are building it up from one database through the whole life process. We have used dRofus from the start in the project, and we are now in the time when we are operating the new terminal, the new functions. And dRofus has been with us in the total time of this project. So it started with thinking what are we going to make to date when we are operating this fabulous new terminal. What we have done now is that it's the dRofus that is the main master asset register, that you have one place where you know that you have the correct data. And then you can use that master register in all the other systems that are operating at an airport.
The work that we have done with Avinor over the years is actually still ongoing. When they received their buildingSMART award in 2018 for design and construction, we also had some statements regarding that. And for us, this has been a project that we have focused on making this right for Avinor. And they are the only customer that currently are running with dRofus as the master asset database. We have deliberately chosen not to sell this too hard before we are 100% sure that the solution is feature complete and are ready for other customers to have as an option if they want to use dRofus in the life cycle instead of exporting all the data at the end of the project. Now we are very, very close to be there, and that's why we now also start to talk about it and give our customers the options and say that this might be something to look into. But we have been buildingSMART members in 2003. We will always export and be able to export our data out on open formats like IFC, COBE, Excel, whatever, so no one gets a lock-in into dRofus. What we said when we nominated this project to buildingSMART International was that it's maybe the best implementation we have seen regarding getting all the data and the models updated at the end of the project at handover. Normally that is a mess. But this statement is not completely true, because we have seen one other example, and that was actually here in Australia. The Sunshine Coast project by HDR Rice Doubney is also a very, very impressive implementation of how it's possible to keep the control of the data throughout the project. Keep it updated with the design files and make sure that you have 100% control on every change that is done throughout the project. So the last thing I have here is a couple of minutes video from that project as well.
Sunshine Coast University Hospital, really interesting project. First major health PPP that Queensland government undertook. The largest non-replacement greenfield hospital built in Australia in about the last 25 years, really significant. An hour and a half north of Brisbane in a rapidly expanding area called the Sunshine Coast.
We managed approximately 1,100 user groups. Throughout those user groups we generated approximately 51,000 pieces of feedback and approximately 45,000 pieces of equipment. The need for quality, coordinated documentation was paramount.
The room data, which was embedded in the model, derived from dRofus, had so many other parameters that were needed to give accurate quantification for the QSs. So when it came to specific departments which had very, very unique finishes, it was not in the model, in the geometry, but in the metadata attached to it. So that was highly valuable for us, because that information remained as the models were updated, so we could rely on where that information was and its veracity.
On the projects of this size, FF&E is always a risk. It's always a problem. The beauty of the dRofus system is your ability to customise and our ability to create very easily new fields in a multitude of different designations, just text, numbers, dates, and then utilise those fields to store data, retrieve data, is quite unique. We'd never come across anything like that before.
So to manage a project of that size, we had to rethink some of our workflow and internal processes, and we made dRofus a key part of that. So what we did there is we made dRofus sort of the single source of truth, and we made sure that all the team working in our office was clear that changes were initiated in dRofus and then they fed through from dRofus into the BIM models. That way we always had, as I said, a single source of truth, and we had, I guess, something that was trackable in terms of changes and responsibilities.
That kind of concludes my presentation as well, and regardless of how you want to use dRofus, whether you want to use it only in the project phase or in the operational phase or both, you are obviously free to get in touch with us. Thank you.